After we pasted in the code into the loop, I started to notice that our code is becoming really nested. Not only that, I know for a fact that this part of the template is reusable. In future lectures, we'll be reusing this part of the template multiple times. Therefore, I want this to be reusable. Luckily, WordPress provides a solution for this by providing something called template parts. Template parts are reusable templates that we can add into any template we want. By themselves, they don't do anything. A template parts are meant to be used inside another template. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the function getTemplatePart. This function will load a template part into your template. It's similar to the getHeader and getFooter functions. The only difference is that you can give your template parts any name you want. If we take a look at the parameters, you'll see there's only two. The first parameter is the slug for the generic template, and the second is for the specialized template. What does WordPress mean by generic and specialized templates? This function tends to confuse some developers, so let me break down how it works. This function will load a template, but it performs a lot of checks before it loads the template you specify. Here is the simplest example of the function being used. In order to load a template, you need to specify the path relative to the theme folder. In this case, WordPress will load a template named content.php. Pretty simple so far. Let's take a look at the second parameter being used now. In this example, we're passing in the phrase foo for the second parameter. WordPress will load either one of two templates. First, it'll combine both content and foo together into the file name content-foo.php. If that template doesn't exist, then it'll search for the content.php template and load that instead. You can think of this as a backup. At this point, you may be thinking, why don't we just do this? Why don't we just use the first parameter exclusively? You may be tempted to do this. For the most part, this is completely valid. However, I don't recommend it. The purpose of the second parameter is to give yourself a backup template just in case WordPress is unable to find your first choice. The only time you don't want to use the second parameter is when you know for a fact that you don't need a backup template. I'm going to go back to my editor and I'm going to create a new folder called partials. This is where we'll be storing all our template parts. You can name this folder whatever you want. Partials is just a fancy word for parts of a template, sometimes referred to as template parts or views by other developers. Inside this folder, I'm going to create another folder called post. This is where we'll store template parts related to posts. Lastly, I'm going to create a file named content-excerpt.php. Once again, you can name this whatever you want, but it should accurately describe what's inside. I'm going to cut and paste the HTML code into this template like so. Now we have the excerpt in its own file. All we need to do now is load it inside the loop. Right after the post function, call the function getTemplatePart. The path you have to pass in must be relative to the theme folder. This function basically does what the require function does. You may be thinking, why don't we just use the require function then? Well, it's because this function does a whole lot of checks for you and makes sure it'll grab the template relative to the current installed directory. Keep in mind that you can use this function inside of template parts. So trying to keep track of where you are in your folder structure can get tricky. This function eases that by always pointing to the theme folder. All you have to do is point the path relative to the current theme. The great thing about this function is that you don't have to worry where you are in your template. If you're inside a nested folder structure, then the path you input here will always be the same. This is because it'll append the path you pass in onto the directory of the current activated theme. The path to our file is partials/post/content-excerpt. You do not need to add the extension as it's added for you already. Let's check to see if this works, and then we'll explore this function a bit more. After refreshing the page, you should see the static blog post appearing a few times. This is exactly what we wanted. Now let's go back and examine the two parameters for this function. I'm going to make a copy of this function and make one small change. I'm going to move the word excerpt into the second parameter like so. This is also a valid way to use this function. Earlier, I told you about general and specialized templates. This function provides a way to display a default template in case a certain template is unavailable. Let's examine the first function first. I'm going to add a comment above. The template that will be loaded when this function runs is the content-excerpt.php template file. However, if WordPress doesn't find this file, then nothing will be loaded. For this second function, WordPress behaves a bit differently. WordPress will look for a template called content-excerpt.php. WordPress will combine the two paths together, separating them with a dash. This is similar to what we did above. However, here's where things get different. If WordPress doesn't find the template content-excerpt.php, then WordPress will look for a template called content.php. So basically, whatever is in the first parameter. If WordPress doesn't find this template, then nothing will be loaded. This behavior is really great as it allows you to create a fallback or default template. If we go back to the documentation, you should now understand that WordPress describes the default or fallback template as the generic template. If you want to load a template for a particular situation, then you can use the second parameter to your advantage. This is really great, as you won't have to do the checks yourself. It's taken care of for you behind the scenes. A practical example would be loading a template for a specific month. For example, let's say I had a function called getMonth that returns the current month. In this imaginary example, I'll have a template for the month December. I'll end up having a file named content-december.php. This will be the only template for this month. Any other month will not have a template. Therefore, I would just let all the other months fall back to just content.php. That's just a basic example. It's up to you how you want to use this. Anyway, I'm going to change this back to excerpt and comment it out. I don't plan on having multiple templates for the content-excerpt, so this first line will do just fine. In the next lecture, we'll make the content generated dynamic.